In the steaming jungles of the Pacific, Japanese soldiers once marched with unshakable faith. Their emperor was divine, their mission sacred, and their belief in victory absolute. But then came a weapon, not a bomb, not a tank, not even a bullet, but something that whispered into their very souls, breaking centuries of warrior spirit. It was the weapon they could neither fight, nor kill, nor outrun, and once it arrived, many stopped believing in victory at all. The Pacific War was more than a clash of steel and fire. It was a struggle of wills, and in this war the United States discovered a terrifying truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the human voice. Tonight we journey deep into the psychological battlefield of World War II, where America unleashed a weapon designed not to kill, but to break the spirit of Japan Sep's warriors. A weapon so effective that many soldiers would lay down their arms, convinced the war was already lost. It began with a voice in the darkness. To understand why one American weapon could so deeply unravel Japanese faith in victory, we must first understand the power of belief that fueled Japan's soldiers. For them, the battlefield was not just a place of combat, it was a sacred ground where honor, loyalty, and sacrifice for the emperor eclipsed all else. From childhood, Japanese men were raised under the shadows of Bushido, the way of the warrior. This ancient code of honor demanded loyalty, courage, and death before dishonor. To die in service to the emperor was not a tragedy, it was the highest destiny. In such a culture, surrender was unthinkable. By the time the Pacific War erupted, Japanese leaders had instilled in their people a near-religious devotion to the emperor Hirohito, seen as a living god. Propaganda promised inevitable victory, even against the vast industrial might of America. Each soldier believed he was part of a divine mission, one that could not be defeated by mere machines or men. The stunning strike on Pearl Harbor only reinforced this confidence. For many Japanese soldiers, the war began as proof of their empire's superiority, but what they could not see, not yet, was the storm that America was preparing. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh were awakening, producing weapons of war on a scale the world had never witnessed. In time, Japanese soldiers would face Sherman tanks, B-29 bombers, flamethrowers, and the unrelenting naval blockade. But even in the face of overwhelming firepower, many still clung to their faith in victory. Their spirit refused to bend, until the Americans unveiled a weapon designed not for the body, but for the mind. It would not strike from the sky, or crawl ashore from the sea. It would slip into the dugouts, the trenches, the weary nights of starving men, and whisper to them, "You have already lost." This was psychological warfare. The Americans called it the voice. War, at its heart, is not just maps and strategies. It is flesh, blood, and spirit. To understand how one weapon could pierce Japan Sep's unyielding belief in victory, we must listen to the men themselves, those who endured the hunger, the disease, and the endless march of death in the Pacific. By 1943, Japanese soldiers were scattered across islands stretching thousands of miles from Guadalcanal to New Guinea, from the Solomons to the Philippines. Supplies grew scarce, units were cut off, many were left to survive on roots, insects, and the hope that reinforcements would come. We eat once a day, if we are lucky. Some drink seawater. We tell each other the emperor will not abandon us. But at night, in the silence, I wonder if we are already forgotten. Cease. Deseda, my beloved wife, I do not know if this letter will ever find you. My comrades are dying each day. Some fall from illness, others from despair. We were told our victory was assured. But now I cannot see how. Seda. In these fragile words, cracks began to show. Even among the most devoted, doubt had begun its silent work. But doubt alone was not enough. The US knew it had to drive that wedge deeper, to take those late-night fears and turn them into surrender. And so, America launched a campaign unlike any seen before, not aimed at the body, but at the mind. Radios, leaflets, and the mysterious female voice that would soon haunt Japanese soldiers in their foxholes. A voice that spoke their language, revealed their weaknesses, and whispered the one message they dreaded most: you are abandoned. You cannot win. For men raised to believe surrender was worse than death, This message was devastating, because in their hearts, they began to ask, if the Emperor cannot save us, why die at all? When conventional weapons could not reach the caves and jungles where Japanese soldiers clung to their faith, America turned to a new strategy: leaflets. Words printed on fragile paper, scattered across the Pacific like whispers from the sky. At first, they carried simple messages, urging surrender, promising humane treatment, showing photographs of well-fed Japanese prisoners. Later, the words grew sharper. They told starving soldiers that their fleets were sunk, their cities bombed, their families left to starve. Each sheet of paper was a dagger aimed at the spirit. The leaflets said the Emperor had abandoned them, that their commanders were lying, that America's victory was inevitable. Soldiers were warned that refusing to surrender meant only a slow, meaningless death. 2. Good evening, lonely boys of the Pacific. How many of you still dream of home tonight? While you suffer here, your wives and sweethearts in Japan are forgetting you. The Americans are coming, and you cannot stop them. Selv. This was the infamous Setikyo Rose Estet, a name given by Allied troops to female broadcasters who spoke in Japanese and English. Their voices slipped past defenses, reaching soldiers in the stillness of night, seeding doubt, isolation, and despair. The United States poured immense resources into this unseen front. Psychological warfare units crafted messages with precision, knowing exactly what would cut deepest hunger, abandonment, the loss of family, and the betrayal of their leaders. For men who had been told since childhood that surrender was worse than death, the broadcasts were poison. If their emperor could not protect them, if their commanders had lied, if their families no longer waited, then what was left to fight for? And yet, the more America pressed with words, the more Japanese commanders cracked down. Possessing a leaflet could mean execution. Listening to enemy radio was treason, but the words still spread, shared in whispers, read by candlelight, replayed in memory during the darkest hours of hunger. The battlefield was shifting, not in firepower, but in faith. And for Japan's soldiers, faith was everything. By mid-1944, the psychological war was colliding with the battlefield itself. On the island of Saipan, Japanese soldiers and civilians faced the terrifying reality of America's relentless advance. They had been told the US was weak, that Japan's warriors could never be defeated. Yet here, before their very eyes, the myth began to unravel. For the first time, Japanese soldiers surrendered in significant numbers. Many were starving, others too wounded to fight. And in their hands, Americans found the proof: crumpled leaflets, sometimes hidden in uniforms, sometimes tucked in helmets. Words from the sky that had told them resistance was hopeless. Therefore, we thought the Emperor would send reinforcements, but then we heard the broadcasts. They knew our positions, our conditions. They said Japan had no ships left. It was true. We were abandoned. What choice did we have? Yet for others, the breaking point was not surrender, but despair. Japanese propaganda at home had warned that Americans would torture and kill. When faced with reality, thousands of civilians, mothers, children, the elderly, threw themselves from cliffs into the sea. Here, psychological warfare collided with lies planted by Japan itself, producing one of the war's darkest tragedies. After Saipan, the cycle deepened. At Leyte Gulf, as Japan's navy was shattered beyond repair, American leaflets declared the truth: Japan's fleet is gone. You are alone. On Okinawa, leaflets rained down like snow, while hidden radios whispered nightly that Japan's cities were burning. Soldiers who once vowed never to surrender began to yield by the thousands. For Japanese commanders, this was the nightmare, an enemy that struck not only with bombs and bullets, but with the slow erosion of faith. They could no longer rely on the unbreakable spirit of their men. The sacred bond of Bushido was being cut, not by steel but by words. And in those moments, across the Pacific Islands, the unthinkable began to take root. Japanese soldiers were no longer fighting for victory, only for survival. By 1945, America no longer saw psychological warfare as an experiment. It had become a weapon in its own right, planned, refined, and unleashed with industrial precision. Every island campaign was now fought on two fronts, the battlefield of bullets and the battlefield of the mind. Tens of millions of leaflets were printed, designed by linguists, tested by psychologists, and dropped from the skies by bombers. They showed Japanese soldiers photographs of their own captured comrades, alive and well in US camps, eating meals. They revealed American victories, often before Japanese high command admitted defeat. They even carried safe conduct passes, slips of paper that guaranteed humane treatment if surrendered. For men taught that capture meant certain torture, these safe conduct passes were shocking. Some soldiers hid them under their uniforms. Others clutched them in secret, waiting for the right moment. To hold such a paper was both a lifeline and a death sentence if discovered by their officers. You are surrounded. There is no hope of reinforcement. Your commanders have fled. Lay down your weapons, and you will live. This was Operation Loudspeaker, where Americans used powerful amplifiers to broadcast surrender appeals directly to enemy positions. Sometimes they used Japanese prisoners of war, speaking to their former comrades. Other times, the broadcasts taunted officers, exposing lies soldiers had been told. In the dead of night, when hunger and fear gnawed deepest, those voices cut through the darkness. For some, the words were unbearable. They shattered illusions, stripped away honor, and forced soldiers to face an impossible truth. They had been abandoned to die. For others, those same words were a lifeline, the first sign that survival was possible without shame. The tide had turned. Where once surrender was unthinkable, now it was happening in thousands. And every surrender carried more than rifles. It carried stories, confessions, proof that the psychological war was working. With each broken spirit, the weapon grew stronger. The sword of Bushido had not been broken by steel, but by the slow, steady voice of doubt. By 1945, America wielded psychological warfare like a surgeon's scalpel, no longer scattered experiments. These operations became calculated campaigns, each designed to strike at the precise moment when Japanese morale was weakest. Intelligence units tracked the movements of Japanese troops, their supply shortages, even their psychological state. At critical moments before a major assault, or after a crushing Japanese defeat, American bombers unleashed storms of paper instead of bombs. Each leaflet was a message tailored to its audience, soldiers, civilians, or entire garrisons. Some leaflets carried safe conduct passes. Others displayed maps proving Japan's shrinking empire. Still others warned civilians of upcoming air raids, giving them time to flee, a gesture meant to prove America's humanity and to sow distrust in Tokyo's propaganda. On Iwo Jima, leaflets rained down day after day, even as artillery shook the earth. They told the defenders that they were surrounded, that their fate was sealed, and though most fought to the end, some soldiers clutched those papers, praying for a chance to live. You are brave men, but bravery cannot feed you. Your navy is gone, your air force destroyed. Why die for officers who have already abandoned you? So. On Okinawa, surrender broadcasts ran day and night. Sometimes Japanese prisoners themselves pleaded over the speakers, calling to their comrades by name. At night, when silence hung heavy, the words traveled far, carried on the humid winds. Thousands surrendered. Each man carried not only a rifle but a story of hunger, of despair, of a voice or leaflet that convinced him resistance was futile. Every surrender weakened Japan's army, not just in numbers but in spirit. And with each new wave of leaflets and broadcasts, the collapse accelerated. By summer 1945, these operations reached Japan's home islands themselves. B-29s dropped millions of leaflets over Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Some warned of bombings to come. Others declared the war already lost. Many Japanese civilians read these words in secret, their faith in Tokyo's promises beginning to fracture. The weapon of words had grown from whispers in the jungle to a storm across the entire empire, and soon it would reach its most decisive test. Okinawa was the crucible. For 3 months, Japan's defenders fought with ferocity, suicide charges, hidden caves, kamikaze strikes. Yet when the smoke cleared in June 1945, More than 100,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead, and for the first time America faced waves of surrender on an unimaginable scale. Many emerged carrying the very leaflets dropped from the skies, their safe conduct passes. Others came forward after hearing familiar voices over loudspeakers, begging them to survive. The Bushido Code, once unbreakable, had been pierced. The myth of Japan SIP's invincibility was gone. By the summer of 1945, psychological warfare leapt beyond the battlefield. Millions of leaflets rained on Japan's cities, warning civilians of air raids. One leaflet even listed 11 cities still untouched, promising that each would soon be bombed unless surrender came. Days later, those cities were indeed struck, just as the papers had foretold. For civilians and soldiers alike, the message was undeniable. America knew everything, controlled everything, and could not be stopped. When the atomic bomb was prepared, even then, leaflets were dropped first, warning civilians that their city would be obliterated. Few believed it possible. But when Hiroshima vanished in a single flash, and then Nagasaki, the words became reality. For Japanese soldiers scattered across the Pacific, the news spread quickly, through leaflets, through rumor, through whispers from captured comrades. The Emperor Sit's divine protection had failed. The Empire Sit's power had evaporated. Victory was no longer a dream. It was a lie. Even within Tokyo SEP's high command, the psychological weapon had done its work. Ministers debated not whether Japan could still win, but whether they could endure annihilation long enough to surrender with dignity. The once absolute conviction of Bushido had crumbled beneath the weight of despair. The weapon America forged had reached its ultimate climax, not in steel or fire, but in the simple, devastating idea planted in every soldier fit's mind: it is already over. On August 15, 1945, the unimaginable happened. For the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito spoke directly to his people. In calm, archaic words, he announced Japan SEP's surrender. To his soldiers, scattered across islands and jungles, it was as if the sun itself had gone dark. They had been told their emperor was divine, that he would never yield. Now his voice carried across the airwaves, confirming what the leaflets and broadcasts had whispered all along: the war was lost. Tuesue do not know how to live now. We were told to die for victory, but there is no victory. The Americans told the truth. Our leaders lied. My sword feels heavier than ever. For some, surrender brought unbearable shame. Officers chose suicide rather than face dishonor. Others burned regimental flags, destroyed weapons, or wept openly as they turned themselves over to American forces. Yet for countless soldiers, starving, diseased, abandoned, surrender was deliverance. For the first time in years, they ate until full, drank clean water, and knew they might live to see home again. In camps across the Pacific, surrender leaflets were kept as tokens, slips of paper that had promised survival and delivered it. Some men admitted that those leaflets had saved their lives, giving them the courage to defy orders and lay down arms. For the civilians of Japan, too, the weapon had left its mark. They had read the warnings, seen the bombs fall, and realized their leaders could not protect them. The surrender did not simply end the war, it ended an illusion, one that had defined a generation. The loudspeakers that once urged soldiers to give up now broadcast new messages of peace, of order, of rebuilding. The weapon of words had shifted from breaking the will to fight to guiding the path, toward surrender and survival. The aftermath of this weapon was not measured in cities destroyed or ships sunk, but in minds changed, beliefs shattered, and countless lives saved or scarred by the decision not to fight to the death. When we think of weapons that ended World War II, we often picture tanks, bombs, and battleships. But history reminds us that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not made of steel or fire, but of words. The American campaign of psychological warfare broke something the Japanese military had built for generations, the belief that surrender was impossible. It shattered illusions, stripped away propaganda, and forced soldiers to confront a truth their leaders had hidden, that victory was gone. For many who survived, the memory was painful. They had lived through betrayal, through the collapse of a world they thought eternal, and yet for others, those words raining down from the sky, those strange voices on the radio, meant salvation. They were the difference between dying in a futile last stand and going home to rebuild a shattered nation. The legacy of this weapon is complicated. It was born of war, but it carried the seeds of peace. It proved that even in the darkest moments, the human mind, not just the battlefield, can decide the fate of nations. And it leaves us with a question: if words can end wars, if truth can pierce through fear and propaganda, what else can they do in our own time? The echoes of World War II remind us sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. This was the story of the weapon that made Japanese soldiers stop believing in victory. Not a bomb, not a bullet, but the truth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more echoes of history. Thank you for watching Echoes of WWE.